Morning, my friends. We are continuing with our roadmap for right living based on the 52 qualities for life that Swami describes in this book, Affirmations for Self-Healing. We're on subject number 3, which is happiness. So let us now begin with the prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramahansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, Friend and Guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel your living presence within, to know that we move through this world always surrounded by the power of divine love and by the personal guiding presence of our masters. We are your children. Bring us home to thee. Om, peace. Amen. Now, I often include in a prayer that idea that we want the masters to bring us home. It's a very interesting phrase, isn't it? That concept of home. I came to Ananda, to live at Ananda Village on June 1st, 1971, just before my 24th birthday, which is an astrologically interesting moment because every 12 years, Jupiter, who represents the guru in your horoscope, makes a complete circuit and comes back, complete circuit back. So every 12 years are very often points of big spiritual change, which is why at the age of 12, often there's a huge change. Of course, puberty sets in. It's a little bit like from birth to 12, not for everyone, but for many people. You kind of get a little bit of a hiatus from the compelling demands of your ego. And then at the age of 12, it's kind of like that little hiatus is over and the ego comes in and you have to start living the life that you're really going to live for the rest of the incarnation. That's why what happens at the age of 12, as I understand it from our school teachers, is that prior to that time, many children do not identify deeply with themselves and their own actions. And one of the advice that one of our Nitai, who's the founding developer of our Education for Life system after Swamiji, said it's very important for children under the age of 12 especially, that they understand that your connection is with them and that the two of you observe their behavior, that you don't treat your child as if he or she is their behavior, because for the child, they're not so self-defined that they actually see that relationship as automatically as the adult does. A little child who knocks over his glass of milk every night at the dinner table is surprised every time when the milk goes over, and he doesn't actually see it as him knocking over the milk. It's more like he's there and the milk is knocked over. So if the two of you, which is your child and yourself, work on the fact that the milk gets knocked over, instead of condemning the child for knocking over the milk, he says the relationship is more wholesome. It's just been a wonderful way of understanding it. But at the age of 12, just as an archetype, self-identity sets in, and suddenly the child is his behavior. So the capacity to objectively discuss the behavior without getting an emotional response from the child, Nitai said, just can happen overnight. And he characterized it like this. You say to your child at the breakfast table, your room looks a little messy, can you clean it up? And your child responds by saying, you hate me, you've always hated me. And the poor parent just doesn't really know what happened. But it's a profound and a deep personal criticism where it used to be just an observation of a fact that had to be settled. Now, where did all of this come from? Why did I start? Oh, home, that was the word I was thinking of. So I came to Ananda just before I was 24, And I lived at Ananda village for 16 years, and almost all that time I was either working for Swamiji or living in close proximity, you know, in the neighborhood right next to him. Ananda village is now 1,000 acres, so you can be quite some distance away, but I always lived right in his neighborhood, almost always. And I also, because I was Swami's secretary and personal assistant for a period of time, and also cooked for him for a period of time, like his home was my home, his literal home. I didn't live with him at all, but of course I was very familiar with his home. I helped care for it. And more than that, my parents raised me, I feel like my parents raised me really well to the point where they could hand me over to my guru, you know, through Swamiji. And then I could learn how to be a person. So I always refer to Ananda as my childhood home, Ananda village as my childhood home, and I actually refer to Swami's house as my childhood home. And when I go back there, I have the nostalgia that an adult would have for their childhood home. You know, it's filled with memories. Also, being with Swamiji as the example of what it actually looks like to be a grown-up, I always felt like a child, in the best sense, in the sense of chela. Chela is a Sanskrit word which means, well, Swami writes this in the Bhagavad Gita commentary. There are two kinds of disciples. One is shishya. I haven't got that word right, but it's something close to that. Can't think of it. I have the first syllable right, but not the second. Which means that you're devoted to the teachings, and you're following that path. But you want to move from that to being a chela, because chela means child. So you're a child of the Guru. And it has multiple meanings to it. Child meaning childlike, and also the word that came to my mind was dependent, which is actually really the right word, which is understanding that everything comes through the Master. At the end of Swami's life, the last few years, whatever subject he was going to talk about, he almost immediately brought it back to the story of meeting Master and becoming his disciple, because, 60, 70 years of being on the spiritual path had come down to the fact that he was Master's disciple, and everything else was incidental to that. That's what a chela is. Chela just knows that. So living with Swamiji, learning how to be a grown-up in a way that no one had ever been able to teach me. I want to give my parents credit because they raised me well, and I grew up very ethical, very honest. And I grew up with many wonderful virtues that they instilled upon me. My vices were of my own making. My virtues were their gift to me. But they weren't wise in a spiritual sense. They were wiser than many parents, but not wise compared to Swami. So when I was in the company of that wisdom, I was able to learn how to be a human being in the best possible way, and of course a devotee and a disciple. So I always think of it as my childhood home. So whenever I say, words are so subjective, because I can speak mother, father, home, and my mother, father, home from birth, my birth mother, father, home, it's all a positive. It's all a very positive image. It's a kind of vague, shadowy image because it was all preparation for my real life. But nonetheless, it's all positive. But, I have one friend who, his first memory of childhood is being slapped as a baby for no reason. He had a horrible upbringing with drunks and, just terrible. So when you say home to him, he gets a very different response. Orphans have a different response to mother, father. It's all very subjective. But whenever I think home to me is first my birth family, very positive, but then my childhood home, which is Chela, Crystal Hermitage. Now, where Swami was, I can see the kitchen. I can see it as it was remodeled, all of that. And that word has so much power, doesn't it? Home, whether we actually have a positive image that we really experienced in this world. You see, it also works both ways, because if we have a negative life experience, it helps us to repudiate that life experience by realizing that I do have a home somewhere. And that's also why that's the other context of it. I mean, I don't want to go back to being 25 years old. Well, sometimes I do. When I was talking to Swamiji once about reincarnation, and he said to me, what causes us to reincarnate is longing and regret, which in itself is extraordinary phrase. What causes us to reincarnate is longing for something that we enjoyed and want to repeat, longing for something we never got and would love to have, and regret over what didn't quite work. And so when he said that to me, I said, well, sir, I could go back and live that first 10 years at Ananda in a heartbeat. I said, it was heaven on earth. And I remember Swami smiled so sweetly, and he said, oh, well, that's different. And what he meant about that was a divine longing. That was not Maya, because that was so exhilarating, because I had found my home. And my home was with God in spirit, but it actually also, it was heaven on earth. It manifested in this wonderfully pioneer, simple, exhilarating time of the founding of Ananda. But even if we have no positive association with the word home, the soul knows that it belongs somewhere. And if we didn't know that, we wouldn't have a negative response to the opposite. Because if there was no possibility ever of true happiness, then it just wouldn't even arise in us that the lack of it was actually a lack. It would be just the way things are. But the soul knows, and the soul never forgets. Our hearts are restless, St. Augustine said, until we find our rest in Thee. So if one has positive associations, as I do, with the word, those positive associations expand from the form into the spirit behind it. And if one has only negative associations with that word, it allows us to push aside that negativity and claim that which is truly mine. It's just so we're just so gifted to have stumbled upon these teachings. And that's how I have always felt. It's just like, wow, I don't know what I did in the past, but it must have been really, 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 really good. Yesterday I was talking about, oh no, it was in a different class. It wasn't in this one. But I was talking about being at Mother Teresa of Calcutta, at her convent in Calcutta, and seeing the absolute poverty of the nuns and the total simplicity of their life, which is very appealing to me. I think I must have done that kind of work for many, many incarnations to have gotten this lifetime. You know, just paid my dues and got lucky. So we're actually talking today about quality number 3, which is happiness. Swamiji put these qualities in an order that he thought had a certain rhythm to it. At a certain point, we actually reorganized this book. I'm not sure which books were reorganized, but because we read a certain reading from the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita from the book that Swami wrote, and an affirmation, there was some effort to try to match those. I'm not sure whether both books were reorganized, but we did that for a few years, and Swami allowed us to do it. And then after we'd had our little experiment, he said that he felt that the original order was really the order he wanted to maintain. So it's not arbitrary. He had 52 qualities. They're not alphabetical, so they could have been in any order. So doing the book this way, instead of week by week, I'm sort of watching it. The first quality he had us talk about was success, which is an interesting place to begin. It's January, And it's often, this is the time when we make a new beginning. The second quality he talked about was love. And now the third quality is happiness. So later on, we get into other things like work and security, forgiveness, self-control, good health. All of these are important to the roadmap for right living. But first we lay the foundation about as fundamentally as we can. The whole discussion about the quality of love, it's just, you can't get more, from the inside out than when you really start talking about love. So now we're talking about happiness. Someone asked me once, there are 8 manifestations of God according to the traditional Indian way. I'll try to remember them. Love, peace, calmness, joy, wisdom, energy, light, and sound. Energy is sometimes called power, but it's the same, light and sound. Someone once asked me the marvelous question, what are your favorites of the 8 manifestations of God? It was a fun question because I'd never really thought about choosing favorites. So I had to think about it. But I decided that my 2 favorites, I couldn't decide between them, are wisdom and joy. And I actually realized, yes, of course you could have favorites. Someone their life could be a quest for peace. And many people would say their life is a quest for love. But I like wisdom and I like joy. So we're on happiness, which is a vibration of joy. Does he have joy as a separate one? Yes, he has joy as separate from happiness. Just a second. Yeah, joy, number 38 is joy, and number 3 is happiness. So, at the rate I'm going, in 2 years we'll get to joy. But in the meantime, you just stay tuned, because now we're on happiness. So we only have to do 35 more, and then we'll get to joy. So I'm going to read the whole paragraph here, and then the whole 3 paragraphs, and then we'll take it apart word by word. Happiness is an attitude of mind born of the simple determination to be happy under all outward circumstances. I know why he has happiness and joy separate, is because joy is a synonym for the Sanskrit word ananda. Because in Sanskrit, you have nuances for these words. Happiness could be for any reason at all. Happiness could be because you've vanquished your foe and he's no longer going to bother you anymore. But joy, translated as ananda, means the transcendent state of bliss, which is our true nature. Happiness is a reflection of that transcendent state, but happiness can be caused by many things, but true ananda is not related to the material world. So that's how he's making a distinction. Happiness is an attitude of mind born of the simple determination to be happy under all outward circumstances. Happiness lies not in things, nor in outward attainments. It is the gold of our inner nature, buried beneath the mud of outward sense craving. So there we're going to Ananda anyway, through the doorway of happiness. When you know that nothing outside you can affect you, no disappointment, no failure, no misunderstanding from others, then you will know that you have found true happiness, which is Ananda. Okay, that sounds so simple. You can write that in just so few words. When you know that nothing can actually affect you. Yeah, sure, Swami. We'll see how we're going to get there. Resolve strongly to keep this flame burning ever in your heart. Isn't that beautiful? So let's start from the beginning. Happiness is an attitude of mind born of the simple determination to be happy under all outward circumstances. In the context of Education for Life, which is the name that Swamiji has given to the whole, when Master was a young man and had been through a number of years of training with his guru, Sri Yukteswar, and Sri Yukteswar essentially told him that it was time for Yogananda to, step out of the ashram life and do something for the world. the first thing that Master did was found a school for children. It's very interesting when you think about that, in the light of all that Swamiji has developed for Master through Ananda. The first thing that Master did was, the greatest need that he saw that he could fulfill at that time in India. Of course, he was also, he was also meditating and was helping others in countless ways. But the first manifestation of his outward mission was a school for children. You read through Autobiography of a Yogi and see how many different times Master was so dismayed by the formal education that he was receiving and how distressing it was to him. When he managed to graduate from high school and went out on his own and went into an ashram and was determined to seek God and not have an ordinary life, then he meets Sri Yukteswar in miraculous circumstances in an alleyway in the city of Varanasi. All of this is an Autobiography of a Yogi. And then confers with his guru, and his guru insists that he has to go back to his parents' house, and their blissful meeting ends in an impasse of stubborn will. Sri Yukteswar says, in 1 month you will go back to your parents' house, and Master says, I will not. And then 4 weeks later he finds himself back in his parents' house. And then he goes to his guru, and now he's surrendered to his guru. I mean, all of this is what you have to call divine lila. Lila is, again, one of those wonderful Sanskrit words. It means the play of God is one of the ways to define the word lila, but it's a way of understanding, I was going to say it's a playful word, because it has this quality of, this is beyond, you can't just reason all this out. The divine flow happens, and there's no other explanation except to say it's just the lila. That he met Sri Yukteswar, that they had this impasse, that he ends up doing exactly what his guru said. Then he goes to his guru, and his guru says to him that you must enroll in college. And Master, says he's resolved to do whatever his guru wants. But he even says, he expresses in an Autobiography of a Yogi, will these ridiculous classes and textbooks follow me for the rest of my life? Because it has nothing to do with anything that he's actually interested in. Sri Yukteswar says you'll be going to the West, where your college degree will give you credibility. And Master's just a teenager at this point when all of this is happening. And so, of course, he accepts it, and he enrolls in school. He seldom attends classes, but he enrolls, and then by his guru's intercession, he graduates and gets his degree. But all of that tells you that Master did not think much of formal education. Now, stop for a moment and just consider how devastating it is for society, how much a society is defined by how its young people are educated, what values are instilled in them, what helpful or unhelpful training they receive, what terrible gaps there are in their understanding. The first half of this program today, I was talking about, even though in the context of the society in which I live, the culture, the society, the country, everything, my upbringing I had a fine upbringing. I had a reasonable education. I had the opportunity to have an education, but I feel just like, I feel like Master. I didn't rebel, and I didn't have any miracles like he did, but I didn't learn anything. I just learned nothing. My entire formal education, as far as I'm concerned, was nothing. I knew how to read before I entered school, just because of the family I lived in. Just nothing. I want to be fair about this. I can't remember learning a single thing that was actually useful to me from school. It just never happened. And I see around me a lot of people, especially nowadays, pick up all kinds of things that are really terrible for them. So Master felt this tremendous responsibility to try to set education in the right direction. And Swami Kriyananda, because he's Master's spiritual son and has often played the role of taking the seeds that Master planted in countless areas and then cultivating them and showing us how to bring the plant up out of the ground. So Education for Life has been one of the things that Swamiji really put heart, mind, and soul behind, and Ananda has carried on. And thank God it's been the chosen destiny of a great many wonderful disciples who have then dedicated their energy to that reality as well. So now, having totally lost the thread, because this is a day in which I'm just seemingly randomly chatting about things, Master's, I'm going to try to see if I can reconstruct why I went on this tangent. Master's first work, as soon as he was going to do something, was to try to educate children properly and make it possible for them to understand where the power of life really comes from. So he starts with, where does happiness come from? It's an attitude of mind born of the simple determination to be happy under all circumstances. Happiness lies not in things nor in outward attainments. You know, going back to the school as an example, we started one of the primary purposes of the colony Ananda community that we have here in Palo Alto. One of our equal to starting our church, and in many ways you might even say more important, has been to establish Education for Life in this area. Swamiji told us that if we can make a success of, Ananda calls its expression of Education for Life Living Wisdom Schools. That's the name of the Ananda-sponsored branch of Education for Life Schools. If we can establish a living wisdom school here, and we now have a school that goes all the way through high school, if we can make it a success, literally across the street from Stanford University, in one of the most intellectual areas in the whole world, if we can show that this educational method produces, excellent human beings who can be success in any way they set their mind to, then the whole world will believe in this system. So we have dedicated our energy and our resources simultaneously to building the church, the temple, teaching Kriya and all of that, but simultaneously with equal commitment to developing Education for Life because of the concept of happiness. So that brings me back in the last minutes here to why I'm talking about Education for Life. What is the purpose of education? It should be to give us the capacity, let's go 1, 2, 3, to be a success, a true success in life, to be able to give and receive love, and therefore to lay the groundwork for true happiness. I mean, why else do we live? And true happiness that's based on divine principles that will lead us automatically to an expansive involvement in sharing and uplifting with others. That's what happiness is. That's where it comes from. And as we continue, we'll talk more about it. God bless you, my friend.